Guys, welcome back to another episode of Meta Startup. One really cool thing is that I finally managed to go get a haircut. Between managing Avalon and doing this series for you guys, I've had no time whatsoever. So I'm glad that I finally managed to get a haircut. It's been like 3 months and counting. And yesterday, my co-founder Shashank just came, dragged me out, which is why I missed out on yesterday's episode. I'm really sorry about that. To make up for it, I'm putting up 3 back-to-back episodes of Meta Startup, which you can find on my YouTube channel. Now, I know a lot of you will be looking for co-founders at some point in the future, so I have made a Facebook group called Meta Startup, obviously, duh. So I've made a Facebook group which will encourage a lot of you to have discussion. It's harder to have discussion on Instagram, which is why we made this group, and it's going to be moderated by 2 people from my team, Abhinav and Nanda, and hopefully, we discuss a lot of important basics as well as some of the complex topics when we get there. As usual, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe to me on YouTube because this content, we're just going to snowball. We're going to keep doing more and more and more of this. I'm only going to slow down when I think that I've put out enough content for you to be able to understand how to build a business from scratch to some amount of early revenue. Now, for a second, I want to talk about success. A lot of people think success is a binary thing. You're either successful or you're not. But what I've seen is that that metric for success, those goalposts for success keep changing as you get more successful. So whenever people used to ask me if my startup was successful, I didn't have an accurate answer because those goalposts kept changing. Did I feel successful after I raised my first round? Yes, for a little bit. Did I feel successful after making my first sale? Yes, but those goalposts moved again. So those goalposts keep moving time and time and time again. So teaching you how to be successful at running a startup is a moot point, right? It just isn't possible because those metrics for success change over time. But in every startup's journey, in every startup's life cycle, there are a few milestones like raising your first round of funding that are similar between all startups and that are achievable. So now that we're done with the basics of how to register a company, we're going to talk about equity and cap tables and how the business side of a startup works. When do VCs come in? How much do you dilute? How does the dilution work? So we're going to go through all those topics. It is going to be slightly finance heavy, but I'm going to explain these concepts in a way where even a 10-year-old would be able to get them and absorb them and retain them for a lifetime. So without much further ado, we're going to dive deep into the business end of things, and I'm going to be doing most of this on my computer, so the audio is going to change a bit. I'm really excited. Let's get started. Alright, so guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be doing some hands-on work. I'm going to be showing you what a startup looks like to everybody from its founder, to its investors, to future investors, to a potential acquirer. I'm going to show you how it looks like from the business end of things. Now, all of this is loosely based around something that I've kind of learned from almost 5 or 6 years ago. It was created by a man named Sal Khan. It kind of runs you through startup life cycles from scratch to death to even IPO. And we're going to follow a similar route, but I'm going to, make it very India specific, and I'm going to add some points of my own. All right, so let's go through what a startup looks like in its early days. We're going to use this kind of as a digital whiteboard. We're going to go through what equity is, what shares are, how co-founders should split their equity, yada yada. We're going to go through all of that on the stream right now. So what is a startup in its early days fundamentally? Right, so let's draw this. Let's say you and your friends were sitting down. You had like a great idea. You want to sell maybe t-shirts online, right? And we're only going to focus on digital businesses throughout the entirety of Meta Startup because I think every business should be digital today. Otherwise, you don't have a chance, right? So let's say this is a big idea. Let me just draw that. Let's say idea. Now, I have a question for you, right? What is this worth? What is this idea worth? And you can say take some time and you can say, okay, this idea is worth 50,000 rupees or 2 lakhs or 30 lakhs or 30 crores. How do you know the difference between a good idea and a bad one? The thing is, you don't know what the idea is worth. So we're just going to put a question mark here and we're going to say we don't know what it's worth. Now let's say that this entire section displays the assets of a startup. Now let me just write that down, assets. Now assets are things that the startup actually owns, right? So the startup technically owns the idea. So let's just say, this is the idea of the startup. Now, the startup has nothing else going for it, right? So let's come up with a simple formula to kind of determine what the value of the startup is. So let's say the assets of the startup, assets, is equal to liability, and we'll come to what liability is in a bit, liability plus
equity, right? So we don't have any liabilities right now. Liabilities when you take debt or take a loan or something. So we don't have any of that right now. So let's just focus on assets equal to equity. So I'm going to draw this right here, this thing on the right. I'm going to say this is the equity table of the startup, right? So the equity table determines who owns what in a startup. It's basically a cap table. It's the display of ownership of a startup, right? So let's say in this startup, we've got two co-founders, you and your friend. So let's say co-founder 1 and co-founder 2, right? Now, both of you are good friends. You say, okay, I'm going to start a startup, and you guys decide to register the company. Now, in India, remember, when you register a company, you buy 10,000 shares at 10 rupees each. So I don't know what the rupee symbol looks like. I think it looks like something like this. So that's roughly about 1 lakh. So let me just write that down. Right now, this is the paid up capital and the authorized capital of the company. Right. So let's say this is the valuation of the company. It's early day. Every company in India, when it starts out with a valuation which is 1 lakh. Right. So this is how we start out. Now, co-founder 1 and co-founder 2. We know that the total number of shares in the company are 10,000. So let's say we own 5,000 shares each. Each of the co-founders owns 5,000 shares. Now, I don't generally recommend co-founders split equity half and half. I've kind of run through this in my previous videos. But for the purpose of making math easy, in this video, we're going to have them split shares equally halfway. You know that right now these co-founders have just an idea, right? So what else is added to the idea? Say, co-founder 1 is a very good graphic designer, and co-founder 2, he's great at logistics, or he's done logistics before. So he brings that kind of experience. So, in the assets section, let's call this the assets section, and let's call this the equity section, right? We can also call this the cap table, but for now, let's just call it the equity section. Now, we have these skills, right, that are worth something. Again, you can't really put a price on this, but let's just put down everything that we have. And this is what the startup looks like at its very, very early days. So now let's assume you guys decide to launch that website. You call it clothesindia.com. Say clothesindia.com, right? Now, I'm sure you see that there's a problem here, which is that once you give out these shares, say 5,000 shares are given out to each person in your company, and co-founder 2, he takes his 5,000 shares, and the very next day he decides to disappear. Now, this happens all the time, right? So co-founder 1 and co-founder 2 say, look, to get all your 5,000 shares in the company, these are yours, these are allocated to you, but you've got to spend a minimum amount of time in the company. Now, let's say it takes 4 years for a startup to be successful, right? Or for co-founders' work to be, valid and worth it. If and only if, both co-founders are willing to stay for 4 years, do they actually get their shares, right? So this is called a vesting period, right? Let me write that down. Vesting period, right? So for 4 years, these shares are kind of locked in. They're still allocated to the individual people, to the individual co-founders, but you can only access, all 5,000 shares after 4 years. Now, there might be events like sickness and whatnot. So maybe co-founder 1 is only able to work for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. What happens in that case, right? So to make do for that, there's something called a cliff, which is that at the end, this is CLIFF, at the end of every year, 1/4, right, of all these 5,000 shares are released to co-founder 1 and co-founder 2. So they get 1/4 of their shares every year, right? So this happens for 4 years until they get all 5,000. So at the end of the first year, co-founder 1 gets 5,000 divided by 1/4 of his shares, right? And these are called cliffs. So different startups have different cliffs, but usually it's a 1-year cliff and a 4-year vesting period. That's kind of standard. Now, we know that there are 10,000 shares in the company, 10 rupees per share, 1 lakh is the total paid up capital, which is also at this point the valuation of the company. So we're saying that all of this together is worth 1 lakh. Now, let me just open a new sheet, right? Now I'm going to refresh this page and talk about what happens when the startup goes for its first round of funding. Now, there are many different types of venture capitalists you can go to. Let's call them VCs. But the one we're going to be talking about in this particular scenario is angel investors. Now, angels are typically, they're not really VCs, they're just, people who've made a lot of money a couple of decades ago who want to bet on different startups now. And these are guys who, make a lot of startup bets. Most of them fail. These are the guys who take the most amount of risk because they invest at the earliest stage. So they take a little less risk than the founders, but a pretty significant risk in itself. Now we go to an angel, and of course, we've got to redraw our kind of assets section. Let me do that. So this is the idea. Just going to redraw this entire thing. And this is the skills of the team, of course. And let's also draw our equity section, because all of this is, somebody owns this, which is you and your co-founder. So let's do this, co-founder 1 and co-founder 2. These are 5,000 shares each. I'm not going to denote them right now. But what we do know is that at this stage, a startup begins to form something called a board. So the board is basically the people who represent the startup, right? So let's make two faces here. This is co-founder 1 and co-founder 2, because you guys own most of the shares. You will be representing the board. Just do that, CF1 and CF2, right? So you take the decisions. You take a decision whether to, jointly this board takes the decision whether to raise a new round, whether to kind of not take the round, whether to expand into new markets, yada, yada. So these guys they're the decision makers of the company. Now, at this point, you go to the angel and you say, angel, I want to raise a round from you. I think I need 1 crore. I think it takes 1 crore for me to run this company for the next 18 months. Will you be willing to give me 1 crore? And, a lot of angels shut the door. They say, we're not investing in clothes startups. It's just too late. But one angel, takes favor on you and says, I see myself 20 years ago in you guys, so I'm going to invest 1 crore in you guys. And he says, what is the valuation or the pre-money valuation of your company? Now, I want to introduce several terms here. The first one, of course, is pre-money valuation. I want to introduce another term called the funding amount. And I want to introduce the post-money valuation, right? So these are 3 terms we're going to introduce. And the VC asks you, what is your pre-money valuation? What is the value of your idea plus your skills plus a prototype or whatever you might have at that point? And you say, I registered my company a few months ago. So, at that point, the value of this company was 1 lakh. And the VC laughs at you and says, at the early stage of a company, the valuation of the company is dependent on a thumb rule, which is in India, anywhere between 5 to 10 crores. This is the average pre-money valuation of most companies in India, most seed stage companies in India that are digital. And you might say, and with surprise, you say, dude, the valuation of my company was 1 lakh. How did it go to 5 or 10 crores all of a sudden? And again, there are no metrics to go by. There's no revenue. It's just you go by a standard value, which is anywhere between 5 to 10 crores. Otherwise, you end up, devaluing your company completely, right? So the pre-money valuation, the investor takes favor on you and he says, you know what, you guys are nice, so I'm going to give you a 10 crore valuation, right? He says he values this at 10 crores. Again, there is no way an idea and just skills are worth 10 crores. You might think that, but if the startup ends up doing really well, you'll realize that you've actually got a fair bargain for this, right? So we'll say the pre-money valuation of this company is 10 crores. And the investor says, okay, you want 1 crore, I'll put in your 1 crore, right? The post-money valuation it's a very simple formula, which is the pre-money valuation plus the funding amount, which is 11 CR, right? The post-money valuation is basically what is the valuation of the company after the round with the assets of the company, which is the idea and skills, plus the new funding amount. So the funding amount now essentially becomes an asset of the company, right? So it becomes, this is 1 crore here, and we know this is 1 crore, obviously, for obvious reasons. The total becoming 11 CR, which is the post-money valuation, right? Now, what do we give the investor in return for this, right? We give the investor shares in the company, right, to denote ownership. Now, 2 questions you're going to ask me here are, how many shares do we give away and what is the price per share? Because the price per share of any company should always be the same, right? For every share in the company, the price is the exact same. We know that there are 10,000 shares here, split halfway between both the co-founders, 5 and 5,000, how many shares do we give the VC or the angel in this case? The answer is you give him 1,000 shares, right? And this is very straightforward, simple. You have a 10 crore valuation, you're adding a crore on top, that's 10%. So you issue 10% more shares. Note here how the shares are not transferred. It's not you give away 1,000 shares from your pocket, you introduce new shares onto the company, right? And this is called dilution. Now, a lot of people think that when dilution happens, they're losing something in the company. Now, that's not technically true because although your stake is reduced, the value of the company has increased to make up for it. So, don't worry too much about dilution at this stage. Try to focus on generating even more value or trying to settle at a slightly better valuation. Now, there are downsides to having too high a valuation. We're going to come to that in a little bit. Now, what is the price per share? Now, we know that the angel holds this. Now, what is the price per share? So, I want to introduce two formulas here, which is the price per share equal to pre-money valuation divided by number of shares before the round. In this case, that would be the pre-money valuation 10 crores divided by 10,000. We had 10,000 shares before the round, which is equal to 10,000. So each share in the company now is valued at 10,000 rupees. It used to be valued at 10 rupees and now it's gone up to 10,000 rupees. Now I'm going to introduce one last formula to you which is going to confuse you a little bit. You might think that the angel has 10% in the company, but he does not. Instead, the stake of the angel is calculated as invested amount divided by post money valuation, which is in this case the 1 crore, which is the funding amount, divided by 11 CR, which is the post money valuation, which comes out to 9.09%. He does not have 10% in the company as you would think, which is kind of straightforward. Instead, it's 9.09% in the company, right? Whereas the co-founders of the company have the rest, 90 point whatever. Now remember, we valued this section of idea and skills at a certain amount. And the angel is hoping that over time you add more assets to the company. Maybe it's a product, maybe it's some revenue, maybe it's some early customers. And this is what the rest of Meta Startup deals with. How do you increase this section of your assets of your company? And the angel is hoping that at some point this goes from 10 crores, this entire value of the company goes from 11 crores to maybe 100 or 200 crores, at which point you sell the company and he's able to cash out. So they're all looking at this section of your company getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of this depends not just on cash in the bank, but also on other kind of intangible assets. And we're going to get to this in a little bit. Now, the next thing the angel is going to do is he's going to wire some money to you. He's just going to make a simple bank transfer, send you a crore straight into your company's corporate bank account. And because he owns a decent amount of shares in the company, he becomes one of your, let me just draw a mustache. I hope this is a good mustache. He becomes one of your board members, right? So if you want a decent amount of equity in the company, you can kind of elect board members. And in this case, the angel elects himself to be on your board. So people can sit on boards of multiple different companies. So for example, I sit on the board of 4 different companies, and it's pretty common to see, decision makers between different companies to be the same person. Now, sometimes as the company gets bigger, you will be, chunking this. You might give away, some ESOPs. And let me just write that down. It's called employee stock options. You might give away some ESOPs to different employees. So, the co-founders will dilute. But at this point, you have to remember that not any individual person in the company can dilute. So this is wrong. Instead, the entire company, including the angel, dilute to make a separate ESOP pool. So they all kind of lose their shares to kind of put in this ESOP pool, right? And we're not going to dive deep into ESOPs here, but typically when you go to an angel, they will ask you to already have an ESOP pool so that they don't end up diluting to make an ESOP pool later. In the next video, this startup is going to go out and raise a Series A from institutional investors, which are kind of serious investors who manage other people's money. We're going to explore that in the next episode.